the big European discovery and what came next. So, picture this. It's the 15th century and Europe is getting really into exploration. Spain and Portugal are sending ships off to find new routes to Asia. They're after spices, silk, basically all the cool stuff you can't get at home. But as these things tend to go, instead of landing in Asia, Christopher Columbus accidentally bumps into the Americas in 1492. He thought he was in Asia, but instead he's in a whole new world full of resources that Europeans had only dreamed of, like gold, silver, land, and more. Now, Columbus and his crew didn't exactly get a warm welcome. The indigenous peoples were already living there, shaping the land and their cultures for thousands of years, but the Europeans saw them as well primitives or savages who needed to be civilized with European religion, culture, and technology. Spoiler alert, it wasn't as kind or neat as they imagined. On top of that, they brought diseases like smallpox, which wiped out massive portions of the indigenous populations because, of course, the native peoples had never encountered these diseases before. North American natives, who were there before the Europeans came. Now, before Columbus, before any Europeans arrived, North America was home to millions of indigenous people. The term native just means people born in the place they lived. But for centuries, Europeans called them Indians and viewed them as primitive. But these peoples had complex societies, rich traditions, and deep connections to land. The inhabitants of North America are believed to have come over 30,000 years ago from Asia, crossing a land bridge from Siberia to Alaska. They brought with them silks and knowledge that allowed them to adapt to a wide variety of environments, from the icy tundras to lush forests. They didn't just hunt and gather. They also farmed, growing crops like maize, beans, and squash. But they didn't build huge empires like the Aztecs or Incas. Instead, the societies were organized into smaller, decentralized groups that lived in harmony with the land. Their cultures were incredibly diverse, with hundreds of languages spoken across the continent. Their belief systems were deeply tied to natural world, seeing time as cyclical and nature as sacred. They passed down stories, histories, and traditions orally and had an extraordinary understanding of the environment, the seasons, the landscapes, and the animals they lived along.
So now the Europeans know that there's this whole new world to claim, and they start setting up shop. Spain and Portugal are the first to get in on the action. Spain takes over pretty much all of Latin America, Mexico, Central and South America, and a bunch of Caribbean islands, and parts of what are now Florida and California, and Portugal grabs Brazil. The whole region from Mexico to the tip of South America gets called Latin America today because most people there speak Spanish or Portuguese thanks to colonization. But it wasn't just Spain and Portugal. Other European powers had to get their piece of action. France is up in Canada, all over St. Lawrence River and places like Ohio and Mississippi rivers. They're really into how native groups exchange cool crafts with each other, and trade becomes a big part of their influence. The Dutch are setting up shop in the Hudson River Valley and some Caribbean islands. And of course, the English plant 13 colonies along the Atlantic coast of North America. So what exactly are these Europeans doing in these new lands? They're not just here for sightseeing, they're here to make money. So they set up these huge trading companies that's all about extracting wealth. In exchange, the Europeans traded stuff like blankets, iron tools, guns, and wait for it, alcohol. Now, this is where things get dark. The natives didn't have alcohol before, and it quickly became an addictive. It gave Europeans a major advantage in the trade because they could use it to control the deals. So, instead of just trading goods, the Europeans traded things that would weaken the indigenous people's societies, like alcohol, which led to addiction and further manipulation. That's not all, they also introduced tobacco. The natives took to it, and suddenly tobacco becomes a hot commodity. The Europeans turn it into one of the main goods in the transatlantic trade, so the whole relationship becomes a lot less about friendly exchanges and more about European domination through trade and manipulation.
The 18th and 19th century were marked as a period of profound transformation in the relationship between the Europeans and Native Americans. Europeans viewed themselves as a superior society, defining through their their perception of literacy, religion, and urbanization. The Native Americans were labeled as noble savages and uncivilized.
But for some French philosophers like J.J. Rousseau, they were to be admired as they were left untouched by the corruptions of civilization.
Many of them left Europe and came to America to begin a new life. As long as there were vacant land, this was not a problem. But gradually, Europeans moved further inland near the villages. They started using the villagers' irons and tools to cut down forests and lay out farms. Natives and Europeans saw different things when they saw the forest. The natives saw tracks invisible to the Europeans, while the Europeans saw many land for making farms.
Different types of settlers. Some of the migrants from Britain and France were sons who couldn't inherit their father's property. Later came people from countries like Germany, Sweden, and Italy who had lost their lands to big farms and wanted farms that they could own. People from Poland were very happy to work in grasslands which reminded them of their houses and were very excited at being able to buy huge properties at very low prices.
Large areas were acquired by USA by the purchase. They bought land in the south from France, the Louisiana Purchase, and from Russia, Alaska, and by war, much of the southern USA was won from the Mexico. It did occur to anyone that the consent of the Native Americans living in those areas really mattered. The western frontier of USA was a shifting one, and as it moved, the natives were also forced to move back. Thus, the landscape of America changed drastically in 19th century.
From the 16th century throughout the 19th century, the Native Americans were enslaved and used for military conquest by the Europeans. The population of Native Americans declined rapidly because of violence, forced removal, and diseases.
The shift from a land-based communal way of life to a more individualistic, market-driven economic change the landscape and social fabric of the continent, contributing to the rise of a new society built on agricultural resource exploitation and, unfortunately, slavery. These events set the stage for the complex and often tragic history that followed as settlers continued to push westward, reshaping both the physical, cultural contours of the America.
Did you know America was named after the Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci, who convinced people that the land Columbus found wasn't Asia but instead a new continent called America? Australia was named in the 16th century as Terra Australis, meaning southern land.